Okay, Mats, can you hear me?
Absolutely, loud and clearly. Can you hear me?
Some people are disappointed that I request you to speak in English. That's due to our international audience and the recording. But I trust that you are as fluent in that language as you are in many other languages. So Mats, no, you have been now to a Gaza conference. Tell us a little about that, but also tell us about your relationship to media and how you think media comes out of the coverage of Gaza, of the horrors taking place there. I'll leave the floor to you.
Shukran jazilan. Salam alaikum, everyone. Good afternoon, Oslo. Just to be precise, the time here in Istanbul is now 15:46, so we are 2 hours ahead of continental Europe. Thank you so much for the invitation. And as you said, John, I'm here in Istanbul on an international conference, which is entitled, interestingly, Palestine and the Future of Global Affairs. And the organizer of this conference is one of the Turkish universities called Ibn Khaldun University. This one, and Ibn Khaldun University is a very active university on international social sciences, and they prioritize, obviously, the Global South. And I'd just like to show you what the sessions are, because I think the titles of the sessions pertinent to what Norwegian academia and Norwegian universities are doing in these critical days for humanity, I would say. It's not, I haven't seen any international symposias in Norway. I'm happy to see that some universities are joining the BDS by breaking agreements with the state universities in Israel. I think that's good, but just to illustrate to you the level of activity in other places of the world which are more connected to the Global South. So the program started yesterday here in Istanbul. The first session, it was an opening session where the Honorable Ambassador of the State of Palestine to UK, Mr. Hussam Samlot, that you may know, most of you, had the opening remark, and I had opening remarks. And then the first panel was safeguarding academic freedom and the role of public intellectuals on Palestine. The role of public intellectuals on Palestine. I believe many in the audience, I only see you from the back, but I guess many of you are intellectuals. And how much do we discuss our role and our responsibilities in these critical months? And then the second panel was critical perspectives on apartheid and the Zionist occupation. And of course, then there were scholars having introductions on each panel and then discussions, and very, broad-based scholars from social sciences, from different parts of the world, many US university representatives and European universities, and also, of course, Arab universities and Turkish universities. And the first panel this morning was Palestine Daily Resistance Against Settler Colonial Violence. Just the titles are quite precise in their formulation of a political understanding of the situation in occupied Palestine. And this is a university conference. The next panel, From Denial to Recognition, Gaza, Genocide, Social Legal Perspectives. And then the fifth panel was Global Solidarity with Palestine and Intersectional Struggle. That's the panel going on now as I am sitting here in my hotel room with panelists from South Africa, from Istanbul University, from Native American activists, and from the Afro-Middle East Center in South Africa. And then the last panel today is Shaping Narratives, the Integral Role of Media in Palestine Portrayal. The Integral Role of Media in Palestine Portrayal. And there are journalists from different media outlets, and it is the head of the TRT, which is the sort of a Turkish BBC, or Turkish NRK, if you will, one of the leaders from their Arab outlet. So this is a broad-based convention or conference discussing many aspects of the ongoing disaster, catastrophe, Nakba, happening in Gaza and in the West Bank as we are speaking. It's well organized. It's saturated with media here. Yesterday during the opening, it was, a whole lineup of live televisions. I have been interviewed, I think, close to 8 times, 10 times. And now I just come from a 40-minute interview with TRT, which is, as I said, the Turkish BBC. So there is no doubt that the attention and the active organization of discussions, seminars, and the responsibility taken by the media and by the academic institutions is quite different here and in many other places in the global south than in Europe and in the global north. So I'm very happy to participate in your event. I think it is an important event, and I want to congratulate you on taking the efforts to organize this, because it's one of a million. It's not one of a million. It's rather unique that we have these platforms in Norway, and I wish we could have more of those platforms. What about the media? Well, to take the conclusion first, I think that Western mainstream media, and not at least Norwegian mainstream media, are very backwards, to use that word, very passive in their covering of what is going on in Gaza and in the West Bank. When I say that, it's not because I want to criticize the individual journalists, because there are many good journalists in Norway, both in radio, television, and in printed media, who are doing excellent work. And I know the restrictions that the occupiers, Israel, are actually putting on the media coverage. So I'll just comment a little bit on that first, and then I will try to substantiate my criticism of Norwegian media in particular. As you all remember, maybe, or many of you will remember from the Vietnam War, the media played a crucial role, and in particular the US media, because at that time they were not embedded in the US Army. So the reporting from Vietnam played a key role in shaping the narrative of what was going on in Vietnam. At that time, of course, there were no social media, there were no internet. Things were sent by other means. The pictures and the films took days, not the same quality, and by and large, not the same speed at all. But those of us who actually grew up during the solidarity times of the Vietnam War and maybe had a brutal political awakening during the Vietnam War, we remember some of these graphic photos. We remember the photo of the girl, the civilian Vietnamese girl, naked, running in the street in her village in Vietnam, with napalm burning on her back and on her skin. And that was a famous or infamous American-US attack on that civilian village. We remember the images of the police chief, US allied police chief in Saigon, which was the name of the capital at that time, executing one of the freedom fighters from Vietnam, the NLF freedom fighters, in the streets in cold blood. We remember the Buddhist monks burning themselves to death in protest against the occupation and the onslaught of the Vietnamese people. And the people of Vietnam won. They threw out the American colonists, imperialists. And we really remember the picture of the U.S. UE helicopter taking off from the rooftop of the U.S. embassy in Saigon with clerks and people from the embassy crawling on the ladder to get into the helicopter and fly away from Saigon. These pictures reached the U.S. and they were telling another story, another narrative. And thousands and hundreds and thousands of young activists protested against the war in Vietnam. And you had the Kent State demonstration where the police came and shot dead a number of students. And this was a turning point in the opinion, and it was a turning point in the shaping of the politics of the US with regards to the occupation of Vietnam. And by the way, the Vietnamese won through a combination of a people's war and a tunnel war, actually. They had dug tunnels all over Vietnam, just like the Palestinians are having tunnels, as if that is an illegal thing to do when you are waging a war of resistance against a much stronger enemy, the US or the Israeli occupying forces. So the media has a crucial role in forming the narrative, not only conveying facts and truth, but forming the narrative. What is going on? Who is right? Who is wrong? What is right? What is wrong? Who do they talk to? Who do they interview? Who do they use as their most critical sources? After Vietnam, the US Army understood the critical role of the media, and they started with the embedding mechanism, meaning that journalists could embed with the US Army, which meant to accept military censorship and by and large accept the rules of the army and be part of the army when going into enemy territory, for example. And most journalists of decency would reject to be embedded in that way. When it comes to the situation in Gaza, the Israeli army are using the embedding technique again, as they did in 2009, when they refused any foreign journalists to go into Gaza without having this embedded treaty or signed contract with the Israeli army. And I think the whole Norwegian press corps denied and refused to go in on these preconditions. And that was when Dr. Erik Foss and I were the only blonde, blue-eyed, white-skinned people to tell about what was going on in Gaza, in Shifa, and with the people, with the civilians in Gaza. But that is not true. That is not the fact. There were hundreds of Arab journalists in Gaza at the same time, brilliant journalists. But they were not heard, they were not listened to, and they were not considered reliable sources because they were, biased or whatever, or it was an unconscious collective racism, a colonial attitude to the journalists in the global south. So they tried that in 2009, the Israeli occupiers. And then in 2014, during the attack, they allowed foreign journalists in, and there were crews from Channel 4, BBC, CNN, and many other Western outlets, and also from the Norwegian NRK. Then in 2020, there were not so many journalists, and now again, from the 7th of October, they have closed the space in Gaza for Western journalists. You can go in if you accept the embedding, and I believe it's only Fox News and BBC who actually were embedded during the attack on Shifa Hospital, and it was pretty heavily criticized. Otherwise, the situation in Gaza now is characterized by the fact that there are no white, blue-eyed, white-skins journalists in Gaza, and as you know, they have killed a large number of journalists. The last number from the UN, which is the flash update that's coming every second day, and I hope that all of you read it. You can have it in your email from UN OCHA. It's saturated with facts, and it is sort of stamped by the UN stamp, so it should be an acceptable source. And the last flash update from day 138 days of bombing, they report that 124 journalists and media workers are killed in Gaza by the occupying Israeli forces. 124 journalists. Why don't we hear about that? Because they are of the wrong color, probably. Openly or unconsciously, the Orientalist or the Western attitude that we don't really care about them, or we don't really want to listen to what they have to say. Anyway, it seems like the space of information from Gaza to Western media, it seems like that space is pretty much depending on having white reporters on the ground. It's a very unpleasant thought, and it's not 100%. And there are reports being conveyed from television teams and writing journalists in Gaza, Arab ones, Palestinians first and foremost. But by and large, these teams on the ground in Gaza are mostly reporting through the Arab and other Global South channels. And if you watch the news these days in AlArabia or in Al Jazeera Arabic or in any of the other brilliant television channels here in the Global South, or you listen to South African channels, South American channels, many of them, it's a totally different picture you get. They have people reporting on the ground with their flak jackets and their helmets. Many of them, we have seen them being injured and shot and even killed live on camera. We have the brave office head of Al Jazeera who lost his son, who was a journalist, was almost killed himself. His photographer was killed and bled to death because the Israelis did not allow the ambulance to save him, the Palestinian ambulance. How much have these stories been covered in Norwegian media? Not very much. And how many of these teams are being used actively by Norwegian media as sources for factual reporting from Gaza? Not very many. It seems like Norwegian media are depending on having the journalists, the Norwegian journalists, on site to report. Because now most of the feed to the Norwegian media comes from Norwegian journalists who are in Tel Aviv, or they are maybe in Ramallah, or they have maybe traveled to Jenin in the West Bank, and there has been some brilliant reporting from Jenin by Norwegian teams from NRK, absolutely. But it seems like in order to get first-hand reporting from Gaza, they cannot actually rely on or trust or get access to the Arab journalists, to call that group by and large the Arab journalists, because they are of different nationalities. And that is a fact, undeniable. And when there are Western teams going to Gaza, most of the time they will use the local people as fixers, meaning they will get them access to subjects to interview or to places to make reports from or to fix hotel and taxes and all that. You know, all journalists need fixers locally. But you seldom see local, native, to use that incorrect term, a journalist being the primary reporting source to Norwegian media. Of course, I don't have an evidence-based base to say this because there is not yet much research on the media coverage. I hope that will come quickly from Norwegian scholars in media science and communication sciences. But by and large, it seems like the Palestinian and the Arab voices from Gaza are underused, to use that term. So if you watch, news reels from Arab television channels and Norwegian television channels, it's both a very different picture in priority and in the factual coverage. Priority, there is very few channels here who do not have Gaza as the number one topic on every newscast. And content, very few of these channels will not have access to on the ground reporter in Gaza. So, of course, the information value is much stronger, much more profound when you watch these channels. And then, of course, the question will pop up, why is it like that? Is it because Gaza is closer to the Arab journalists? Is it because Gaza is more of a case for the global South because it is an anti-colonial, anti-occupation struggle? It is actually a liberation struggle. And like most liberation struggles in the global South, it's a dirty struggle. None of the anti-colonial wars have been pleasant or nice. So it is quite a difficult scenario if you make it difficult. For me, it's quite simple. It is an oppressed, occupied people who have been occupied for the better part of 75 years. Somebody would say from 67, some would say from 2006. It's, regardless of the history line, it is an occupied people who has the right to resist occupation with weapons. I, for one, fully support the armed resistance of the Palestinian people within the limits of international law, like the Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention. I am against any attacks on civilians coming from anybody, Ukrainian forces, Russian forces, Norwegian forces, Palestinian forces, or Israeli forces. So my position is very clear. I don't support Hamas, I don't support Fatah or Jihad or any of the political fractions or armed fractions. I support the Palestinian people's right to resist occupation with arms that they see fit within the limitation of international law. Full stop. And it was interesting yesterday, or was it before yesterday, that the secretary supporting the Chinese foreign minister was making this very blunt statement in the UN that what is going on in Gaza is not terrorism. It is actually armed resistance against occupation. It is a liberation war. And this is a narrative that is not very much covered in Norwegian media. You may, of course, differ in your view on how legitimate this armed struggle is, but it seems that the narrative of Norwegian media too easily is falling into the mainstream media narrative of the good Israelis defending their country against the bad terrorists. And this very simplistic and I would almost say a reductionistic way of looking at a very important historical event is sometimes bringing me to, I feel like almost giving up, because it is so shallow and it's so easy to see that many of the Norwegian news outlets have been, maybe they're waking up more now, they have been in the hands of the Hashbara, the propaganda machinery of the State of Israel, which is constantly feeding a flow of disinformation in the propaganda war. Because we have to understand that there is a propaganda war going on. And this war is all about winning the narrative. And if the narrative to be won is that we are defending ourselves against some ravaged and horrible terrorists who are trying to kill our people and extinguish all the Jews, that narrative is the narrative of the occupiers. If the narrative is that we are defending ourselves against an occupier who are killing children by the thousands and bombing all our holy places and our universities and our hospitals, and we are trying to defend ourselves, that's a completely different narrative. And the media seems to be, the Norwegian media seems to be waggling between what is right and wrong. And it seems like the most important push now may be the all the solidarity that is actually going on in Norway. And, brilliant new action forms like the protests against NRK and the very lame, I have to say, the extremely lame position taken by our state monopoly, NRK, with regards to the demand of just asking the EBU to expel Israel from the European Song Contest. But this is an important focal point because it shows also the double morale, the double speaking of NRK, who was eager to ask EBU to get Russia out of EBU when they occupied Ukraine. And now when it's about Israel, it's another story and it's more difficult, and they're pointing to the government and the Minister of Culture is pointing to NRK, and there is a whole very strange game going on. And the only one keeping that discussion, that discourse alive are these brave cultural workers who are protesting outside NRK almost every day. And I believe it was yesterday they staged a very moving, I think, expose of what happened in Gaza when this little girl was killed in the car when she tried to escape to the south of Gaza with parts of her family. They were killed, and so were also the ambulance paramedics who tried to come to their rescue. And I think it's quite an ironic illustration that this scenery, this play made by the cultural activists outside the entrance to NRK, is the closest you actually get to an in-depth description of this horrible one incident in Gaza, which describes the brutality and the cynicism and the abuse of power exercised by the Israeli occupation forces against the civilian people of Gaza every day, every minute, every hour. And when you read the front pages in Norwegian newspapers, it's like, what happened? Where is Gaza? Is it gone? Has it been solved? And that is maybe my most important concern. It is actually that Gaza is being dropped out of the agenda, that we have sealed off, the flow of information, that the media autocrats are thinking that it's enough now. We've been talking about Gaza for 4 months, it's enough. Whereas
Mats, can I just say
the
that?
horror, 2 minutes, the horror of Gaza is going on as we are speaking. And just to reiterate the last numbers, which are 29,313 Palestinians killed and 69,333 Palestinians wounded, 1.7 million forced to flee their homes and go to the south, 370,000 homes destroyed, and 184 mosques and 3 churches destroyed. There is ample room for more reporting, and we need to have a critical view on our home media, because they try to establish a balance which is imaginary, and it is just as absurd to try to cover the occupier's side in Palestine, in Gaza, as it is if the desk boss on call would claim that the journalist covering a Russian attack on Kiev, to balance that with a comment from Putin's spokesperson to make sure you have balance. There should not be a balanced demand between the occupiers, the invaders, the bombers, and the occupied and the suffering population. So we need to straighten up, we need to criticize, we need to keep the push on the media, because as Herbert Marcuse said in 1968, there is a limited tolerance. There is a repressive tolerance for the freedom of speech, because in crisis, the deep state will make a limit to how much the media can actually tell, because they want to maintain control, security, and power. Thank you.
Thank you. While the microphone finds the first question, I would like to pose a question myself, Mats. You said covering. Another thing is in what way is this information presented? On a day with 200 killed civilians in Israel, Aftenposten puts up 16 Israeli faces of killed Israelis on the front page. They pose a question, for instance, was there a mass rape in October? If so, the evidence might have been destroyed. No question about, I mean, they indicate, they throw out something. So they're presenting, not only covering an issue, but you present it in a way that is conclusive and in a very negative way for the Palestinians. That is my impression, for instance, of Aftenposten.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is part of the Orientalism. It's part of the racism. Most Palestinians who are pictured in Western media, including the Norwegian media, they don't have names. They are just faces. And the more graphic the picture is, or the more dramatic, the nicer to use it as an illustration photo. And this is a degradation of human value of the Palestinians. Whereas, as you rightly say, all these pictures of the killed Israelis, I think they also had names. At least those hostages that were killed by their own friendly fire had names. So there is all the time, there is this sort of hidden or unconscious racism. But most of all, this racism is shown by the way these horrible numbers are presented and what these numbers actually mean. Never before in modern history has a state claimed that the killing of 12,000 children is self-defense. And to try to put these numbers in perspective and analyze it and understand it, I don't see that effort taking place in the Norwegian media. So I think there is this simplification. It is always a fog of Orientalism and racism, which seems to be quite unconscious. And it doesn't seem too much debate. There doesn't seem to be too much eagerness to have a critical debate on the way that we balance the suffering of the Palestinian people and the onslaught of the Palestinian people with the losses on the Israeli side. I'm very clear. I don't want any civilians to get killed in armed conflicts. Absolutely not. But the coverage of the situation in Gaza now is so horrible that it's actually making us become more numb and more insensitive to the loss of a human life. Listen, you cannot place a single glass of water in front of a Palestinian thirsty and hungry child in Gaza without the permission of Israel and the United States. You cannot feed a single pregnant woman a decent meal in Gaza today, and we know the starvation is rampant, without the permission of Israel. What is this covered? What is the report that came 4 days ago about the hunger situation in Gaza covered? What is the report that came from UN 2 days ago about the sexual assaults and the rape among Israeli soldiers against Palestinian female prisoners and Palestinian women? It's not covered. It's like it's another world. So critical journalism, yalla, come on, we need it, and we need more. And I want to support all the brave Norwegian journalists who try to do and also do decent work. There are many examples of that, but by and large, the big media are following mainstream Western media. This is a defense for Israel, and it is to control the terrorists. And, the colonial powers have always been telling that story when the colonized people are standing up and defending themselves and trying to get rid of colonization and occupation. I support them. I don't have to do any excuses for the rebellion and for the armed resistance. And I don't think media should maintain their pro-Israeli stance any longer, because these are historical days.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions in the audience?
I have a very quick question.
Okay, can the microphone? Okay.
As I understand that the building which housed all the records of people's birth records, marriage records, that was destroyed. And it seems to me that it's very difficult to have an accurate casualty rate. How is that happening in practice? Because I would imagine there's a lot of people buried, not reported. Is it dramatically underreported, or I just haven't read anything on this topic. I've read only that the Lancet or the BMJ confirms that it's not an overestimation. If anything, it's an underestimation.
Yeah, thank you for raising that question, sister. You're absolutely right. There was a paper in BMJ and the Lancet showing that the numbers reported from the Palestinian Minister of Health in Gaza were systematically lower than the numbers reported by the UN agencies. I've been working with healthcare in Gaza for 20 years, and I have published scientific studies together with my Palestinian co-researchers. And we have been using these data from the Ministry of Health, and of course we have been doing quality control, and the quality of the reported data from the health registers of the Palestinian authorities in Gaza are very accurate, scientific. The Palestinian academics are of very high quality, and the Palestinian people has always been the best educated people in the Middle East, and they are very thirsty for the academia. And I think we can say that the numbers reported from the Palestinian Health Ministry are, if anything, they are underreporting the number of casualties. So number one is this paper in the Lancet and BMJ, British Medical Journal. The second point is that, as you say, we don't know how many are trapped and buried under the rubble, probably thousands. And the third important point is the fact that hundreds, thousands, we don't know how many, have been dying from curable causes, from diseases. We call that in medicine avoidable death. I mean, if you get a one-ton bomb on your house in Gaza, it may be impossible to survive because you're just completely killed. But if you have diabetes, or if you have a myocardial infarction, or if you have a stroke, or if you have a mental disease like a paranoid psychosis, or if you're pregnant and you are in trouble, these medical conditions will need a healthcare system to look after you, to diagnose you, to treat you, and to follow you up. And according to this last report from the OCHA, UN OCHA, the number of primary healthcare stations who are currently working is 17%, 17% of the primary healthcare in Gaza is operational. And it's only 12 out of 36 hospitals that are operational, and they have killed more than 350 healthcare workers. So the whole healthcare system to take care of the diabetic child and the kid with gastrointestinal problems and diarrhea, which 95% have, in a situation with lack of water and lack of food, is not there, despite the fact that the remaining healthcare system do whatever they can. And the real heroes are the Palestinian doctors and nurses and medical students and paramedics and nursing students. They are really heroes. But the number of people who have died and who are dying from curable diseases and complications to their war wounds, infections, and septicemia is not known. And it may be the same level of people as the ones getting killed, which is now 30,000, around 30,000. So we may be talking of an excess mortality in the population in Gaza that is reaching maybe 60,000 people. This is, I'm not concluding that this is a genocide, but this is a massive ethnic cleansing. And it is going on as you are sitting, sipping your coffee, and I'm sitting here in my warm room in Istanbul, having a nice lunch, and people are starving in Gaza, a few hours away. And kids are getting killed every day, a few hours away. So the numbers are not underreported. They're not overreported. They are probably massively underreported. And that's part of the cover-up. And that's part of the duty of the media to check this. It should not be a doctor's job.
have the next question. Thank you very much. I agree to everything you said, and it's outraging what is happening and the role of the media. But I disagree in one point with you, in that the media's coverage and attitude to this thing is caused by what we call Orientalism. I don't think so, because when it was the Arab Spring, and when it was the conflict in Syria, the medias, they didn't lose any chance to report Muslims that died because of Assad or the Muhammad vegetable man that put himself on fire. So it doesn't have to do with Orientalism. It has to do with very, very concretely political lines. And in the actual conflict, of course, it has to do that the whole West is embedded in the creation of Israel from the whole history, from 1800 up to our day. But the thing about South and North, or the Orientalistic consequence, it appears only when it's political convenient. That's my opinion, and I want to hear if you agree about that, or if you have to say something more about that.
No, I think you have a very good point, and I think this debate, I'd really like to engage in that debate, because I think there may be some blurred lines between Orientalism and racism. Let me be clear, I don't disagree with you, and I think it is for the political gain and the political benefit of the US-Israeli colonization project that they do report differently on different situations, absolutely. But the previous question, I think, is more pertinent to be defined as a result of Orientalism, because when Joe Biden and, of course, the Israeli authorities said that, no, the numbers from the Palestinians are not true, they're exaggerated, they're not valid, we can't use them. That was, and that was reported also by Norwegian media, that was insinuating that the Palestinians could not even count. And somebody said that the Palestinian people is the only people in the world who have to prove that they are killed. So I think many of the attitudes of the media when reporting on the factual findings in the medical sphere of the situation, they have this attitude that Palestinians can't do this, they can't do that. There is a lot of focus every time a single Western medical team is getting in. Their voices are heard all the time. Nobody interviews Youssef al-Arish. I don't know if you know the name, but Youssef al-Arish is Dr. Youssef. He is the Minister of Health in Gaza. He's a young pediatrician. He's been the Minister of Health for 12 years. I know him personally as a brilliant leader, a brilliant doctor, a very, very brave leader. And these voices are under-communicated with regards to any question you want to get an answer to in Gaza medical system. It's always the white voice. I hate that position. And when these medic teams get in, only a few have been allowed in by Israel. And these teams it's only 12 emergency medical teams, which is, it's a drop in the ocean. They work in Gaza European Hospital, all in the south, but their reporting is often massive. And when the numbers from the Minister of Health in Gaza, which is very precise, is reported in Norwegian media, it has been almost as a reflex that they say, these are numbers from the Hamas-controlled Minister of Health in Gaza. Oh, sorry. So every time we are going to report from the hospital sector in Norway, like the number of hospital infections or the struggle about, maintaining local hospitals in northern Norway, we should say that these positions, this statement from the Norwegian Minister of Health is from the labor-controlled Minister of Health in Norway. So I think it is all the time. It's popping up these elements of racism and Orientalism. And my point about the definition or the distinction between racism and Orientalism is that most of us are not racists. but we are unconsciously and unwillingly part of this orientalistic Western attitude that we don't really think that the dark-skinned people in the global south, I'm not talking about you, we don't really think that they can perform or do or manage or understand or convey the facts the way that we can. And that's part of the problem with the journalism. That's part of the reason why NRK is much better on reporting if they have a journalist on the ground in Gaza than if they don't have. Because there are journalists all the time on the ground in Gaza that could be and should be and must be contracted by the Norwegian main media in order to get the Palestinian perspective on what's going on in Gaza. That's my point. Otherwise, I agree with you.
Mats, I know that you have a tight schedule. Thank you for coming in this way. Thank you for being white.
Can I say one thing to end?
Yeah.
We all have to do more. We all have to do more. The powers, the US and Israel, is trying hard to get Gaza off the agenda, to continue the killing in the darkness. The Norwegian government have been very much offended by the criticism from the Solidarity movement, so much offended that the Labour Party has made their own promotional videos with Espen Barth Eide and Jonas Gahr Støre to try to defend that Norway is doing so much. Yes, it's fine. Yes, it's fine. Norway has had a position which is better than many other European governments, but that doesn't take much. Right now, we are at a critical point. And everyone must do more. What you do now is what you would have done during the Holocaust. What you don't do now is what you wouldn't have done during the Holocaust. And too many people are turning away, turning their back to it. And the Norwegian media needs to be much more accountable and much more active in their reporting from this horrible situation that is currently developing in Gaza and in the West Bank. Thank you and have a good day.